Alright, today I will be covering the Guardian Fighter. The Guardian Fighter is the tanky class in Neverwinter. It is not like a tank in most other MMOs where you build HP, resistances, and you hold aggro on a mob while other people kill it. In Neverwinter, there's a lot of mobs consistently in every boss fight. Bosses summon adds, summon different mobs that you'll have to fight. So it's almost impossible just to hold threat on everything. There's a lot of mechanics in other classes that allow you to handle those things differently, but I will be covering what exactly the Guardian Fighter does. So let's load up here real quick. I'm going to be loading into Protector's Enclave, which is the main city, if you don't know that already. Kind of just get right into it. We'll go ahead and just go over stats real quick. That's the most basic thing. When you create your character, you're able to roll different stats and whatnot. Different classes have different stats they need, and different races give different stat bonuses as well. When I picked human, I was given the choice to give +2 to any particular stat, and I chose Constitution. And I'll explain why here in a second. But you also get a chance to roll scores, and there are certain ones that are the best possible scores. I'm going to get away from her so she stops talking. Kind of a nag. Anyways, so just cover strength real quick. Strength, the first point mentioned there is guard meter. Now, if you're not familiar with Guardian Fighter, there is a little gauge on the left. I have it lined up. My companion will get out of the way. There we go. It is active whenever you hold your shield up, as so whenever you hold shift or whatever you have it bound to, and the bar goes down on both ends, up and down I guess, depending on which side you're looking at, and once it reaches the middle it breaks and you can't guard anymore. However, everything you do guard will block almost all the damage. There are a couple abilities that penetrate shields or go around, so it's hard to guard those.
To the shrine of the gods.
But I gotta get away from her, she won't stop talking. So that's what strength's guard meter bonus is. It adds 13% to it. Damage bonus is, so your main damage stat in this game is called power. Just to cover real quick, none of your gear gives any of these scores. These are all from leveling and from character creation. You are able to respec. It costs 600 Zen to do so, and when you respec, you can change how you spend your scores. I'll get to this in a minute, but you can't respec how you originally rolled your character. So the rolls you got in the very beginning are permanent, and you'll have to re-roll an entire character if you want to change those scores. But as I was saying, another thing is damage over time, damage resistance. There's not really a whole lot of dots in this game. You have different telegraphed attacks. Telegraph meaning like the red area on the ground. That signifies that there's going to be some kind of damage coming. There's a fire telegraph that stays on the ground for a little bit that certain mobs can create, and I'm pretty sure that's what the damage over time is referring to. Also, control wizards have a blizzard type ability that does damage to you and does AoE damage around you as well, but it has a dot effect, so I'm pretty sure those are the only two things that I've really ran into that I've noticed. Constitution, action points gain. Now, just to cover action points real quick, action points are what you need, like down here, it says my action points are at 100%. They're what you need to use dailies, which are these two abilities on the side. And daily, it's a confusing name, but it's not something that's actually daily. It's just to keep in line with the Dungeons and Dragons theme. But as you can see with Constitution, it increases how many points I gain. Now, the way you gain points is by using your abilities, which are your Q, E, R, your left click, and your right click. And as well, for the Guardian Fighter, it's also taking damage and guarding gives you extra points as well. So having that boosts that pretty quick. Maximum hit points, that's pretty self-explanatory. Just takes however many hit points you have base, and then also the ones you get from armor, and then adds 30% to it. Not too bad. Dexterity, it's not really, you don't spend any points as a guardian fighter going into this, but the stats for, or the benefits for the stat are resistance ignored, which is like an armor penetration, AoE damage resist, which there's not, it would be like any telegraphed attack that has a wide area, so which is quite a bit of them, but it doesn't affect auto attacks, and deflection chance. Now deflection is kind of like a parry in this game, and you have, like, for dexterity gives me an extra 2.5%. Now my total deflection chance is 12.8%. I also have some pieces of gear that have a little bit of the stat, not a whole lot. It's a really good stat, but for my build in particular, it's not something I'm stacking. But what deflection does is it gives you a chance to deflect, which reduces the amount of damage that the attack would do. For instance, my deflection severity is 50%, meaning it deflects 50% of the damage away from me. Now, like I said, dexterity, it's alright, but you're not going to be spending points into it. Intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, not really going to go into these because you're not going to be spending any points on these. So you can read through and see what they do yourself. But it's nothing you have to concern yourself about spending points into. But you'll be gaining ability scores as you level. When you reach level 10, you can spend 2, which you can only put 1 point into each stat. So I went with Strength and Constitution throughout all. At level 30 and 60, you get 1 point into everything. You don't choose. It just gives you 1 point into everything. But it's an important stat, or important stats, I guess. But again, they're very low. There's not a whole lot of involvement with them besides rolling in this. But if you want to kind of make your character the best they can be, really read up on the theory crafting that a lot of other classes have done, as well as Guardian Fighter, to see what benefits the most. Now, I'm going to go into powers. You start off with, when you first start the game, you get Cleave and Tide of Iron. They're called your at-will powers, which means they have no cooldown at all, and they're bound to your left click and right click. Cleave is, as you can imagine, you swing your sword and do conal AoE damage in front of you. Tide of Iron is kind of like a shield bash that reduces damage resistance against whoever you hit it with, and then you start getting all these other ones. Up until you spend 20 total points into this, into your combat powers, you can't reach rank 3. I believe it's, I have to find it, here it is. This just notes unlock rank 3 of all previous powers once you spend 20 points. A lot of players have thought that something unlocks here. There's some other, category or something here that once you get rank 3 in all these abilities, but there's not. It's just a notifier. So don't be confused there. You'll find a lot of abilities that are really good for your playstyle. For me, I have a lot of abilities and points spent that I don't necessarily use. Into the Fray, I don't really use a whole lot. Just Supremacy of Steel. It's just another example. So you'll find a handful you like, and then you'll just spend the other points to get access to certain things. But a lot of those things will be very situational. This is based off of a character named Rokuthi. I'll be linking him and the other 2 other builds in the bottom description. So it's more of a hybrid tank DPS build. There are certain other abilities that are more useful for tanking or buffing others, as well as just doing more damage. Feats. Now, one reason that I rolled human was not because of the looks, because if it was up to me, I would have played probably like a halfling and looked like a silly little tank running around doing crazy damage. But the racials for human just are too strong. One of the racials is a 3% bonus to defense, which earlier My defense is relatively high, 3,505, which is, yeah. So 3% onto that, it's significant. It's pretty strong. It's about 90-ish, 92, somewhere around there. But the other is with human, you get 3 bonus heroic points. Now, heroic points, you're able to start speccing at level 10. You get 1 per level, except in the case of human, where at level 10, I think it's 10, 20, and 30, you're given 2 an extra point, so 2 at those levels. But they give different benefits, like increased strength effectiveness or increased HP, which again are very important for the build that I'm doing in particular. But you only get, as a human, you get 23. With every other class or every other race, you get 20 points. So you spend those here however you want. And now, one thing a lot of people have been confused about is that as you spec points, a lot of people see these arrows and think that, oh, if I want to go into the tactician tree, I have to spend all my points in this bottom tier, which doesn't work because you have to spend 5 points to move on to the next tier. So that's not what goes on here. You have to just spend 5 points, and then once you get to level 30, you'll start spending Paragon points instead, which are all these over here, and you can spend them however you want to. I chose the Conqueror tree. I originally went Protector. Protector's very tanky, but in this game, you can't be the tank that holds everything constantly. You can help control the fight, but you can't be the master of aggro constantly. You have to have kind of some CC, have some taunts, but you can't do the whole tank and spank everything 100% of the time. So while it's a really good tree and it makes you really, really beefy, it's not as applicable as other trees that I've seen. Unless one of the builds is kind of like it's like a buff turtle kind of thing. You kind of make everyone else stronger, and you're really hard to kill. But it's not my cup of tea, and it doesn't seem like a really strong build for Guardian Fighter. I haven't really touched the Tactician tree a whole lot. I just had some extra points to spend, and Fight-On's really strong. It lowers your encounter abilities cooldowns by 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10%. For every point you put into it, it goes up 2%. But I just went Conquer. I'm a tanky DPS hybrid build, and this is kind of based off of the Rokuthi build again. But I have a little bit of differences in build. And again, it's playstyle choices. It's not really cookie cutter. You can take some things out at certain points. There are some things that are required for this specific build, but other things are more flexible. But you can read through the guide and kind of pick and choose and see how you want to make your character. One thing I'm going to go into is with this build in particular, I'm just going to kind of cover it real quick, is this particular set. It's called the Stalwart Bulwarks set. The reason it's so good is because for every 5% of health you have, they convert that into power, which again, power is your damaging rating. And it stacks up to 5 times, which means 25% of your health is converted to power, which for me, 25% of 3,000, or 30,000, I'm sorry, which is about what HP I have, just for simplicity's sake. It'll put me at least over 11,000 power, which is really good damage. Now, the way those stacks are activated is every time I take a hit. So, this game, there's a lot of hits constantly, and if you're doing damage and you charge in first, you're going to instantly get at least 1 or 2 hits, and then the rest will follow, and your damage will just skyrocket. I tend to be first or second damage in instances. The game's still really early, so a lot of people don't know classes that well, and they don't know builds that well, or what abilities they should be using and when. So it's not surprising, but at the same time, it's really satisfying going in as a tanky character and being top damage. You're not the most bursty, but you're consistent. And there's a lot of AoE damage in this game. So it's a really nice set. And since I get an HP bonus, that's why I have so many points in Constitution, why I rolled that as my highest stat. I also enchant my defensive slots with HP enchantments. As you can see at the top of this list, it says defense slot 480 maximum health. Again, that's going to be adding to my power as I get more stacks, so that's what I'm stacking. For my utility slots, which utility slots I believe are in helm and boots, I put movement just to have more presence wherever I can be. For all my offensive slots but one, let's go. Here we go. I put recovery in. Recovery is what lowers the cooldown on your encounter abilities. Like earlier, I showed that I had put points to lower my encounter cooldowns. Well, recovery does that as well, so they stack on top of each other. It's a very strong stat. The only offensive slot I don't is in my weapon. It could be in any offensive slot. I just chose weapon because that's the item I'm going to be swapping out the least. I put what's called a Tenebrous enchant in, and it does damage. 2% of my current health in necrotic damage, and I believe necrotic damage, it does damage to an enemy, but it also heals you for that damage as well. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And then also, there are, on your chest piece and on your sword has a weapon enchantment slot. Your armor has an armor enchantment slot. Go figure. I chose a Plague Fire enchantment. I don't have one in my armor yet. I've been lazy. These enchantments are relatively expensive, especially for people just starting out. I haven't put any money into this game besides opening a couple lock boxes when I hit 60, but other than that, I haven't really, bought Zen or anything like that to buy items with AD. So it's relatively expensive, but they're very strong enchants. They proc off this one in particular procs off of any AoE damage I do. So anything hit by any of my abilities, this procs it. So it's really strong damage. Other than that, I can't really think. Oh, I guess I could go over the actual abilities that I use. So in your tab slot, other classes are able to swap out things here. For Guardian Fighter, it's just Mark. Mark is like it increases the amount of threat. You can apply it to one target at a time. You can apply it to multiple targets, but it'll only stay on them for a little bit. And it reduces their damage resistance, which allows you and others to do more damage to it. And then it also makes you build threat against them. Again, you're not going to be able to change it, but that's what it does. There are different things called class features, which I will pull up my powers real quick. The first one you get is Shield Talent, increases your guard by 5%. I don't guard almost at all just because of how much I get healed usually. And the reason for that is because there's a spec in the feats that allows me to do more damage the more guard meter I have. In fact, if I have 100% guard meter, I do 100% more damage. So I always keep my guard meter full unless I actually have to block an attack, and because I don't want to die and have to have someone res me or something. But the ones I went with are combat superiority. I deal 10% damage to anything that hits me. Being the tanky guy who has the taunt, I get hit quite a bit, so I'm able to usually hold aggro on those things with my damage and some marks. So doing that damage against them helps get things down faster. The other is Enhanced Mark, which I build threat while they're marked instead of having to actually do damage to them to activate the threat, and then I also generate more threat. My first encounter ability, which you get, it's the first one you get in the game, is Lunging Strike. It's like a charge that has a stab. It does a lot of damage. It allows you to have a lot of coverage on the map, so you're able to get from A to B a lot quicker. If something's like on your healer, if you've got a group of mobs on your healer, you can charge to them and use your taunt ability, which I'll cover here in a second. It's very nice. It just gives you a lot of mobility. Frontline Surge is a damage knockdown ability that does like a row in front of you. for so much distance. I'll actually show the distance. So it's that highlighted area in front of me. Now, it knocks down, does a lot of damage, and when enemies are prone, you do more damage to them, like when they're knocked down on the ground. I can't really get rid of that icon now. That's odd. Anyways, let's stay in for the rest of the video. The next is Enforced Threat, which is an AoE taunt, and the one cool thing about that taunt in this game is it actually does damage. And having the 5 stacks and doing that damage is insane. It does quite a bit of damage. And it's, again, it has good synergy with Lunging Strike because you can charge to, if someone's having the kite stuff off of them, you can charge them, taunt them, and then knock it all down so they can get away, and then you also pull a lot of threat so you get it off of them. Again, these things all have cooldowns that are affected by recovery and also by how you spend your feature points. This Cleave is the first at will you get. At wills are abilities that are bound to your left and right click, and I guess they don't have to be, but that's what I have them bound to, and that's the default bind. Cleave does AoE damage in a cone in front of you. It's what I use when all my abilities are on cooldown. It does quite a bit of damage, and it also applies that debuff from one of my enchants. My right click is Tide of Iron. What that does is it reduces damage resistance, which again is like, it essentially gives you like armor penetration. It's really strong, and it applies it as a buff or a debuff to the enemy, so all of the people in your party who are hitting that mob also gain it or take advantage of that damage resistance being lowered. And all of these abilities, except for Mark, I don't believe Mark does, but all of these abilities, your QER, left click, and right click, all give you action points and allow you to use your dailies. Now, the dailies that I've chosen are Villain's Menace, which is really strong. It makes you immune to CC and then also increases the amount of damage you do, which is really good for going into certain fights where you have to charge ahead of everyone. You pop that, you become a lot bigger, and you use the rest of your abilities to just pull an insane amount of threat and also do a lot more damage. It gives you a really good advantage early so that everyone else can kind of get like situated. Your healer can get the heal on the ground without having to worry about pulling a whole bunch of mobs onto them. It allows your control wizards to figure out who they're going to CC or like what's the most imminent threat. So it's a really strong ability. But the other one I chose was Fighter's Recovery, because there are times when, say, a cleric accidentally gets hit by some kind of telegraphed attack or gets like one shot. You're going to have to tank everything if the cleric goes down to make sure that it doesn't kill everyone else while someone tries to res the cleric. So what I tend to do is I pop Fighter's Recovery. What it does is it allows me to gain health for how much damage I do. So I pop it, and then I pop my my knockdown and my taunt to get everything on me. And it essentially keeps me at full health as long as I keep doing damage for a good 3 or 4 seconds, which is enough time to get the cleric up so the cleric can get the heals going back out and you can kind of go back to what you were doing. It's really good as an oh shit button. It's very helpful. I really can't think of which other ones you would use. Terrifying Impact is another daily where it just does like a cone damage again with your E, except it knocks enemies in the air. Does decent damage, but it's bursty, and that's not really I like to go for consistency instead of bursty, especially if you miss on accident, which happens from time to time. But yeah, that is my build for my Guardian Fighter. People will vary in how they build, but this seems to be the strongest build anyways. A lot of people right now are doing really cheese runs through dungeons where they take 2 control wizards because of the amount of CC they have, 2 clerics because of the AoE heals that they have, which it's very hard to die if you're sitting in 2 clerics like AoE heals because they do stack, and then they take a rogue because a rogue does really good single target damage. And while control wizards will CC all of the trash mobs that come with a boss, because almost every boss in this game summons adds at some point in time, the rogue will stay on the boss, dodge the attacks, get some heals every now and then from either their healing companion or from the cleric, and just DPS the boss down. one thing that a lot of people have been surprised about whenever I come into a dungeon with them is how much damage I take off of them. I don't take extra damage. It's not like I'm walking around just taking extra damage. I take damage off of them. I tend to take 4 times damage compared to the guy in second place, who is probably double everyone else. And then also the amount of damage I do with this build. Now, this build really takes off when you get this set, but before, when I was just using this build, I was second or third DPS. Now, when I have this set on, and I have that 5 stacks, I usually in the dungeon at being number 1 or 2. There's a couple exceptions where I'll, like in a dungeon called Spellplate Caverns, I can help with CCing some of the mobs, but there are mobs that spawn that need to be taken off of the melee DPS that are on the boss, and taunt, or mark, I'm sorry, my tab ability, as soon as I mark one of them, they instantly just come towards me. So I don't do damage there, but I have more utility. So there's a lot to consider with this class. It has a pretty high skill ceiling. You have a lot of utility in dungeons. You do a lot of damage. You can take mobs off of things. If someone dies, especially like a cleric who's very vital, you're able to allow people to recover instead of have to like scatter and kite and hopefully have someone get lucky enough to be able to res the cleric within the amount of time before they're released. So really look into the builds early, because stats are very important. I'll show here real quick. I lost my campfire buff, but I'm at 24 constitution and I have 28,739, which I'm pretty sure whenever I go get the buff again, it'll give me around 400 health, which is pretty significant for just one stat point. There are also other items in the game that give 1 star, not items, but like potions that give 1 to every stat, and it just shows how significant that is. But yeah, overall, Guardian Fighter is a very useful class. It does a lot of damage, and you should really consider taking it to almost any dungeon. It's crazy how much people overlook this class and think it's not really something they should be bringing along. So yeah, if you have any comments or any advice that I should do for this video or any other videos, just leave a comment below, and take care.